Stray puppy finds love with orphan child. Their story will move you to tears. How will this story unfold? To find out, watch the video to the end. But first, please subscribe to my channel and turn on notifications to get more stories like this. The sun hung low over the horizon, painting the sky in hues of deep orange and soft pink. The air was thick with the scent of dust and distant cooking fires, but none of it mattered to Malik. He sat curled up against the crumbling wall of an abandoned shop, his knees drawn to his chest, his bare feet coated in grime. The streets around him were alive with movement. People bustling past, vendors shouting out their prices, the occasional cart rattling over the uneven ground, but no one paid him any mind. They never did. Malik had grown used to being invisible. His small hands trembled as he broke off a piece of the stale bread he had managed to scavenge earlier in the day. It was hard, almost rock-like, but he chewed it slowly, forcing himself to savor every bite. There was no telling when he would eat again. Hunger had long since become a familiar ache in his belly, one that he had learned to ignore. Survival had no room for self-pity. He leaned his head against the wall, letting his eyelids droop slightly as exhaustion tugged at him. Sleep was dangerous on the streets, but his body was weak, and the day had been long. He told himself he would rest for only a moment. Then he heard it, a soft, pitiful whimper. His eyes snapped open, his body instantly alert. He sat up straighter, scanning his surroundings. The sound had been faint, almost lost in the noise of the city, but it was there, weak, desperate. He turned his head toward the alley beside him, a narrow, shadowed space between two buildings, and squinted into the dim light. And then he saw it, a small puppy, its fur matted with dirt, its ribs visible beneath its thin, malnourished body. It stumbled forward on shaky legs, ears drooping, eyes dull with exhaustion. Malik's heart clenched. He knew that look too well, the look of someone who had gone too long without food, without warmth, without kindness. The puppy took another unsteady step before its legs gave out beneath it. It collapsed just inches from Malik's feet, its tiny body trembling as it let out another weak whimper. Malik hesitated. He barely had enough food to keep himself going. The streets were unkind, and kindness did not feed an empty belly. But as he looked down at the puppy, something inside him softened. He recognized that desperation, that loneliness, that need. Slowly, he reached into his hand and broke off the last piece of his bread. It wasn't much, barely a mouthful, but he held it out. The puppy sniffed the air weakly. Then, using whatever strength it had left, dragged itself forward and took the food from Malik's fingers. Its tiny jaws worked slowly, savoring the small gift as if it were a feast. Malik swallowed hard. For the first time in longer than he could remember, he didn't feel alone. The puppy licked the last crumbs from Malik's palm, then looked up at him with tired, but trusting eyes. A tiny wag of its tail made something warm bloom in Malik's chest. He had given up hope a long time ago, accepted his life as a never-ending struggle, but this small creature had just changed everything. With careful hands, he reached out and lifted the puppy, cradling it against his chest. It didn't resist, didn't struggle, just nestled into him as if it had always belonged there. Night fell, and Malik wrapped his thin arms around the puppy to keep it warm. He whispered to it, telling it stories about nothing in particular, about how, once upon a time, he had a mother who hummed lullabies, about how he had once seen a boy riding a bicycle and wondered what that must feel like. The puppy's breathing evened out, its tiny body rising and falling against Malik's chest, a silent promise that neither of them would be alone anymore. Morning came too soon. The city awoke, loud and busy, but Malik didn't want to move. He wanted to stay like this just for a little while longer, but the hunger was already gnawing at his stomach, and now he had another mouth to feed. The puppy stirred as Malik shifted, stretching its tiny legs and letting out a soft yawn. Malik smiled. "You're going to need a name," he murmured. He thought for a moment. The puppy was small, weak, but still holding on. A survivor just like him. Coda, he decided. The puppy's ears perked up slightly at the name, as if it recognized something in it. Malik nodded. "Yeah, Coda, that suits you." He lifted Koda and tucked him into the folds of his oversized, tattered shirt before stepping onto the street. Today they would find food. Together, Malik moved through the marketplace, his stomach twisting at the scent of roasted meats and fresh bread. The vendors ignored him. Some scowled, as if even looking at him was an inconvenience. He had learned to expect that. But today, he wasn't just searching for scraps for himself. He had Koda now, and the thought made him bolder. He spotted a pile of discarded fruit near one of the stalls, some of it bruised and rotting. He darted forward, grabbing what he could before anyone could chase him away. His heart pounded as he tucked the food into his shirt and turned quickly to disappear into the crowd. Behind a crumbling building, Malik sat down and pulled out the half-squashed fruit. Koda sniffed at it curiously before taking a small bite. Malik smiled. "It's not much, but it's better than nothing." Koda ate slowly, just as Malik did. It wasn't a feast, but it was enough. The days that followed blurred together. Every morning, Malik woke with Koda curled against him. Every day, they searched for food, for a safe place to rest. Every night, they huddled close to keep warm. It wasn't an easy life, it wasn't even a good one, but it was theirs. And for the first time in a long time, Malik didn't feel like he was fading away. Koda gave him purpose, something to protect, something to care for. And in return, Koda gave him something he had forgotten he needed: love. The morning sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the cracked pavement as Malik wandered the marketplace. Koda nestled inside the folds of his oversized shirt. The puppy was still weak, but its breathing was steady, its tiny heartbeat a soft, reassuring rhythm against Malik's chest. He moved cautiously through the crowd, keeping his head down, his bare feet silent against the dusty ground. The marketplace was a chaotic blend of sounds and smells. Merchants shouting their prices, the scent of spiced meats drifting through the air, the occasional burst of laughter from a group of boys chasing each other between the stalls. Malik barely noticed. His focus was on one thing: finding food. He spotted a cart piled high with bread, the vendor distracted as he haggled with a customer. Malik hesitated. Stealing was dangerous. He had the scars to prove it. But the hunger clawing at his belly was stronger than his fear, and Koda needed to eat. Taking a deep breath, he edged closer. His fingers brushed against a small loaf, heart hammering. Then, a hand clamped around his wrist. Malik froze. The vendor's grip was iron tight, his face twisted in fury. "Thief!" he bellowed, drawing the attention of nearby shoppers. Panic surged through Malik. He wrenched his arm free and bolted, weaving through the crowd as angry voices rose behind him. His pulse roared in his ears, his breath coming in sharp bursts. He didn't stop running until he reached the far end of the market, ducking behind an old crate. Koda squirmed inside his shirt, letting out a soft whimper. Malik's hands shook as he held the puppy close, his own chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. "It's okay," he whispered, more for himself than for Koda. "We're okay." But they weren't. They were hungry, and they were alone. Malik pressed his forehead against his knees, his eyes burning with frustration. He had tried to be careful. He had tried to be smart. But surviving on the streets wasn't about being careful. It was about being lucky. And he was running out of luck. Koda nudged his chin with his small, wet nose, letting out a soft huff. Malik sighed, scratching behind the puppy's ears. "I guess we'll have to try again later." He stood, cradling Koda as he walked away from the market, away from the people who saw him as nothing more than a problem to chase away. He didn't know where they were going, but they would figure it out. Together, the city changed at night. The bustling streets turned into something darker, quieter. The warm glow of the market lanterns faded into the cold flicker of streetlights, casting long shadows across the empty alleyways. Malik found a spot beneath a crumbling awning, a narrow corner where the wind couldn't reach them. He placed Koda on the ground and sank beside him, pulling his knees to his chest. His stomach growled in protest, but he ignored it. "Tomorrow will be better," he murmured. Koda curled against his side, letting out a small sigh. Malik stared at the stars overhead, his eyelids heavy. Tomorrow had to be better. A sharp kick to his ribs jolted Malik awake. Pain exploded through his side, knocking the breath from his lungs. He gasped, curling inward, his heart slamming against his ribs. A shadow loomed over him. "Get out of here, you little rat." The man's voice was slurred, thick with alcohol. Another kick landed against Malik's leg, sending him scrambling backward. He barely had time to register the movement before Koda leaped forward, barking furiously. The man stumbled, caught off guard by the sudden noise. Malik scooped Koda into his arms and ran. His feet pounded against the pavement, the night air burning his throat as he sprinted through the maze of alleys. He didn't stop, didn't look back, didn't breathe until he collapsed against a wall, his body shaking. Koda squirmed in his arms, licking his chin as if trying to calm him down. Malik buried his face in the puppy's fur, his chest tightening. He had nothing, no home, no family, no safe place to rest. Tears stung his eyes, but he refused to let them fall. He was stronger than this, but even the strongest needed something to hold on to. And right now, all he had was Koda. The days blurred into each other. Malik and Koda survived on scraps, on the kindness of strangers, on sheer will. Some days they were lucky. A shopkeeper would leave out old bread. A passerby would drop a piece of fruit. Other days, Malik went to sleep with hunger gnawing at his insides, his arms wrapped tightly around Koda for warmth. But no matter how bad it got, Koda never left his side. The puppy was getting stronger, his ribs less visible beneath his growing fur. He chased after pigeons in the park, barked at passing bicycles, wagged his tail when Malik laughed. And Malik did laugh for the first time in years. One afternoon, as they sat beneath an old bridge, Koda rolled onto his back, pawing at the sky. Malik chuckled, scratching his belly. "You're ridiculous," he muttered, shaking his head. Koda barked in response, his tail wagging wildly. Malik sighed, leaning back against the wall. "You know," he mused, "if things were different, I think we'd live in a real house. Maybe with a yard." Koda tilted his head. Malik smiled faintly. "Yeah, a big yard, with grass to run on, and a bed. A real one, not just the ground." His voice softened. "And maybe a family." Koda crawled onto his lap, resting his head against Malik's chest. For a long moment, Malik let himself imagine it. A home, a place where no one kicked him awake in the middle of the night. A place where people saw him. A place where he and Koda belonged. He closed his eyes. Maybe, just maybe, that place existed. And maybe one day they'd find it. Together. The nights were the worst. The cold crept in through every crack, sinking deep into Malik's bones, making his fingers stiff and his body shiver uncontrollably. No matter how tightly he curled into himself, the chill always found a way in. But Koda was there, pressed against his chest, his tiny body radiating warmth, his heartbeat a steady reminder that Malik wasn't alone. Malik tucked his arms around the puppy, pulling him closer, listening to the distant sounds of the city settling for the night. Somewhere in the distance, a car horn blared, followed by the muffled voices of people who had somewhere to go, somewhere to belong. Malik squeezed his eyes shut, forcing the thought away. This was his life. This had always been his life. But now, at least, he had Koda. The morning came too soon, the sun peeking over the horizon, casting a dim glow over the city. Malik sat up slowly, his body aching from another night spent on the unforgiving pavement. Koda stirred beside him, stretching his small legs before rolling onto his back, staring up at Malik with tired, trusting eyes. "You hungry?" Malik murmured. Koda licked his nose. Malik sighed, rubbing his fingers over his face. Food. That was always the first priority. The market was the best place to find scraps, but after what had happened last time, he knew he had to be more careful. With Koda tucked into his shirt, he made his way toward the marketplace, keeping his head down, his steps quick and light. The smells hit him first: fresh bread, sizzling meat, the rich aroma of roasted coffee beans. His stomach twisted painfully, but he ignored it. He had learned long ago that hunger was a constant companion. He spotted a bakery with trays of bread lined up near the entrance. The vendor was distracted, talking to a customer, gesturing animatedly with his hands. Malik waited. One breath. Two. He reached out, his fingers just brushing against a roll when a hand clamped around his wrist. His heart stopped. Trying to steal from me again, boy. The vendor growled, his grip tightening. Malik winced, struggling to pull away, but the man was strong. Please, Malik gasped. Before he could finish, the vendor shoved him backward. Malik stumbled, falling hard against the pavement, pain jolting up his spine. Coda yelped from inside his shirt, scrambling out and landing beside him. The puppy barked furiously, his tiny body tense with fear and rage. The vendor sneered. You think a little mutt is gonna protect you? Malik didn't think. He grabbed Coda and ran. The voices shouting behind him faded as he weaved through the crowded streets, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He didn't stop until he was far from the market, hidden behind a row of old buildings. His hands shook as he held Coda close. That was close, he whispered, his voice unsteady. Coda licked his chin as if to say, we're okay. Malik exhaled slowly. But they weren't okay. They were running out of options. That night, Malik sat by the edge of the river, watching the moonlight ripple across the water. Coda lay beside him, resting his head on Malik's lap, his small chest rising and falling with steady breaths. Malik traced patterns in the dirt, lost in thought. How much longer could they survive like this? There had to be another way, a place where they could be safe, where they didn't have to wake up every morning wondering if they would find food, where no one would kick them aside like garbage. Maybe it was a foolish dream, but it was the only thing keeping him going. Malik tilted his head toward the sky. Do you think there's a place for us, Coda? The puppy let out a sleepy sigh. Malik smiled faintly, running a hand over Coda's fur. Yeah, he murmured. I hope so too. The next morning, something changed. Malik woke to the sound of soft footsteps approaching. His instincts screamed at him to run, to hide, but before he could move, a gentle voice called out. Hey there. Malik turned, his body tense. A woman stood a few feet away, holding a small bag in her hands. She was older, her face lined with kindness rather than hardness. I saw what happened at the market yesterday, she said softly. You and your dog. Malik didn't say anything. She knelt, reaching into the bag and pulling out a piece of bread. She held it out, her eyes warm. Malik hesitated. It had been a long time since anyone had offered him kindness. But Coda sniffed the air, his tail wagging. Malik swallowed hard, then slowly reached out and took the bread. It was soft, fresh. His fingers trembled slightly as he took a bite. The woman smiled. There's more, if you'd like. Malik looked up at her, searching for signs of cruelty, of tricks, of false promises. But there was nothing, just kindness. Coda licked her fingers, and she laughed. Malik stared at her, his chest tight with something he didn't recognize. Hope. Malik sat frozen, staring at the woman as if expecting her kindness to disappear at any moment. People didn't just offer food for free. Every time he had accepted something before, there had been an expectation attached. A chore, a favor, or worse, something he couldn't give. But the woman didn't say anything. She didn't push, didn't demand anything in return. She just sat there, watching him with the kind of patience he hadn't seen in years. Coda sniffed at the edge of the bag she held, his tail wagging hesitantly. Malik swallowed the lump in his throat and reached for another piece of bread, tearing a small chunk off for Coda before stuffing the rest in his mouth. The softness of the food felt foreign against his tongue, like something he had once known but had long since forgotten. The woman smiled gently. My name's Lena, she said. I run the small clinic on the other side of the market. Been seeing you and your pup around for a while now. Malik stiffened. She had noticed them? He hated being noticed. It usually led to trouble. Lena must have seen the fear flash in his eyes because she quickly added, I'm not here to cause you any problems, kid. Just wanted to see if you needed some help. Malik's jaw tightened. The answer was yes, but the word wouldn't come out. Lena sighed softly. You don't have to say anything, she said. But if you ever need food or a safe place to rest, my door is always open." She reached into the bag again and pulled out a folded piece of cloth. "Here," she said, placing it beside him. "It's not much, but it's getting colder at night." Malik hesitated, then slowly picked up the blanket. It was thin but warm. He ran his fingers over the fabric, feeling the unfamiliar softness. Koda nuzzled his hand, licking his fingers as if encouraging him. Lena stood up, brushing off her knees. "I'll be around," she said. "You take care of yourself, Malik." His head snapped up. She knew his name. Lena must have caught the shock in his eyes because she chuckled. "The shopkeepers talk, you know. You've been around a long time." Malik swallowed. Long enough to be known. Long enough to be forgotten by the rest of the world, but remembered by the streets. Lena gave one last smile before turning away, disappearing into the crowd. Malik sat in silence, staring after her long after she was gone. Koda let out a small whimper, nudging the bag she had left behind. Malik sighed and pulled out another piece of bread, handing it to the puppy. "She's different," he murmured. Koda wagged his tail in agreement. For the first time in years, Malik felt something strange, the flicker of trust. But he wasn't sure if he was ready to believe in it just yet. The following days passed in a strange blur. Malik and Koda kept to their usual spots, but now there was a change. Every morning, just as the market began to wake, Malik would find something small left behind in the same spot where he had met Lena. A loaf of bread, a piece of fruit, sometimes even a small strip of dried meat. No notes, no messages, just silent acts of kindness. At first, Malik hesitated to take them. He had learned that kindness often came with a price. But Koda didn't hesitate. He devoured the food happily, licking Malik's hands in thanks. Eventually, Malik stopped questioning it. He didn't go to Lena's clinic. He didn't seek her out, but he ate the food. He wrapped the blanket around himself and Koda at night. He let himself believe just a little bit that maybe not everyone in the world wanted something from him. One afternoon, as Malik sat beneath the bridge, tossing a small stick for Koda to chase, he heard a familiar voice. "You two look better." Malik tensed. He turned to find Lena standing a few feet away, her hands in her coat pockets, watching them with a small smile. Koda barked happily and ran up to her, wagging his tail. Malik hesitated before giving a small nod. "We're managing," Lena chuckled. "That's good." A pause stretched between them. Then she said, "You know, I could use some help at the clinic. It's not much, but I could use someone to sweep up, maybe help carry supplies. I can't pay you much, but you'd have a warm place to sleep. And food." Malik's breath caught. Place to sleep. Food. It sounded too good to be true. He wanted to say yes, so badly, but there was a voice in his head, the same voice that had kept him alive all these years, that whispered, "Nothing comes for free." Lena must have seen the hesitation in his face because she crouched down, resting her arms on her knees. "I'm not asking for anything in return," she said softly. "I just don't like seeing good kids thrown away like garbage." Malik swallowed the lump in his throat. He didn't trust easy. He couldn't afford to. But this time he wanted to try. Koda nudged his hand, as if pushing him forward. Malik met Lena's gaze and, for the first time, nodded. Lena smiled. "Come by tomorrow morning. I'll show you around." And just like that, something shifted. For the first time in years, Malik had something to look forward to. Malik barely slept that night. He lay awake beneath the bridge, the blanket Lena had given him wrapped tightly around himself and Koda. The puppy snored softly against his chest, warm and safe in the cocoon of fabric. Malik stared up at the night sky, watching the stars blink behind thin clouds, his mind racing with possibilities. Could this really be real? Could someone genuinely want to help him, without expecting anything in return? The thought scared him more than he wanted to admit. Hope was dangerous. It made you believe in things that could be taken away. It made you weak, and weakness had never been an option. But as he lay there, listening to Koda's soft breathing, he realized something. He wasn't just surviving for himself anymore. Koda needed him, And maybe, just maybe, Malik needed Koda just as much. The thought settled in his chest, warm and terrifying all at once. As the first hints of morning light began creeping across the sky, Malik made a decision. He was going to try. The walk to the clinic felt like walking into a different world. The streets were waking up, merchants setting up their stalls, the scent of fresh bread and spiced tea drifting through the air. But today, Malik wasn't just another ghost weaving through the crowd, another child to be ignored. Today, he had a destination. His heart pounded as he approached the small clinic. It wasn't much, just a modest building with a faded blue sign above the entrance, but it was the closest thing to an open door he had ever seen. Koda trotted beside him, his tail wagging excitedly, oblivious to Malik's nerves. Taking a deep breath, Malik pushed open the door. The inside was small but clean. Shelves lined the walls, stocked with neatly arranged bottles and boxes. A narrow hallway led to a back room where Malik could hear quiet voices. The scent of antiseptic mixed with something warmer, herbs, maybe, or tea. Before he could second-guess himself, Lena stepped into view. She smiled. Right on time, Malik swallowed hard. He wasn't used to people expecting him to show up. He wasn't used to being expected anywhere at all. Lena wiped her hands on a cloth and gestured for him to follow. "Come on, I'll show you around." He hesitated, then stepped forward. And just like that, he crossed a threshold he never thought he'd reach. Lena kept her word. The work wasn't hard. Sweeping the floors, organizing supplies, carrying deliveries when they came in. Malik did it all without complaint, his hands moving with practiced efficiency. He was used to working for survival, but this was different. There was no cruelty in it, no threats, no fear. And at the end of the day, there was always a meal waiting for him. Real food, warm food. He and Koda ate together in the small kitchen behind the clinic, sitting on the floor, savoring every bite. Malik still didn't say much, still kept his guard up, but Lena never pushed. She just let him exist. And that, in itself, was something new. Days passed, then a week. For the first time in years, Malik had a routine. For the first time in years, he didn't go to sleep hungry. For the first time in years, he felt safe. But deep inside, a voice whispered, "It won't last," because things like this never did. Malik still woke up every morning expecting it to be gone. The warm meals, the safety, the quiet rhythm of sweeping the floors, sorting supplies, and sharing food with Koda in the small kitchen felt like borrowed time, like something he would wake up from. He kept waiting for the moment when Lena would change her mind, when she would realize that he wasn't worth the trouble, that he was just another stray who had wandered too close. But every morning when he arrived at the clinic, she was still there. And every morning, she greeted him the same way. "Morning, Malik," as if she wasn't expecting him to run. As if she knew he would come back. He didn't know what to do with that. The nights were still hard. Malik and Koda still slept outside, curled up under the same blanket Lena had given them. She had offered a space inside the clinic, but Malik had refused. Sleeping indoors felt wrong. Too vulnerable. Too permanent. He told himself it was safer this way. If she ever changed her mind, if this all disappeared, he wouldn't be caught off guard. Koda didn't seem to mind. He curled up beside Malik every night, pressing his small, warm body against his chest, breathing softly in the quiet. It was enough, for now. One afternoon, Malik was sweeping the front of the clinic when a voice stopped him cold. "Didn't think I'd see you here, street rat." His grip on the broom tightened. Slowly, he turned. A man stood at the entrance of the alley, a shopkeeper from the marketplace. One of the men who had chased him away more than once. His eyes were sharp, calculating, as they flicked from Malik to the open door of the clinic. "Didn't take you for the type to clean floors," the man sneered. "Thought you preferred stealing." Malik's jaw clenched, but he didn't answer. He didn't need to. Koda was already at his feet, growling softly, his small body tense. The shopkeeper's lips curled. "Figures. You're still a stray. No matter where you're hiding." Malik's chest tightened. It was a test. He could feel it. The man wanted to see if he would snap, if he would run, But Malik didn't move. Instead, he straightened his shoulders, gripping the broom like a lifeline. "I work here now." The words felt strange in his mouth. "Foreign." The shopkeeper scoffed. "We'll see how long that lasts." And then, just like that, he was gone. Malik stood frozen for a long moment. Koda nudged his leg, looking up at him with quiet concern. He let out a slow breath. It didn't matter what the man thought. What mattered was what was real. And right now, what was real was this. He had work to finish. So he picked up the broom and kept sweeping. The encounter with the shopkeeper stayed with Malik longer than he wanted to admit. It wasn't the words themselves that got to him. He had heard worse. He had been called worse. But there was something in the man's tone, in the way he looked at him, as if he was just waiting for Malik to fail, that dug deep. Because a part of Malik feared he was right. Things like this never lasted. People like him weren't meant to have places to belong. That night, as he sat outside the clinic with Koda curled in his lap, he stared up at the sky, feeling the weight of everything pressing down on him. Lena was kind, but kindness wasn't the same as permanence. What if she changed her mind? What if, one day, she decided that he was just another stray kid who wasn't worth the trouble? Would she hesitate before sending him back into the streets? Or would she do it without a second thought? Koda let out a sleepy sigh, his body warm against Malik's chest. The puppy had grown in the past few weeks. His ribs weren't as visible, and his fur had a healthy shine to it. He looked stronger, safer. For the first time, Malik wondered if Koda would be better off without him. He hated the thought, but it wouldn't leave. The next morning, Malik went about his work as usual, but his mind was elsewhere. Lena seemed to notice. "You're quiet today," she remarked as he sorted through the medicine supplies. Malik shrugged. "Just tired." Lena didn't push, but he caught her watching him a few times, her expression unreadable. Later that afternoon, as they sat in the back kitchen eating lunch, she finally spoke again. "You know, when I was younger, my mother used to say something." She picked at her bread, eyes thoughtful. "She'd say that trust isn't something you wait for. It's something you choose." Malik glanced at her warily. "What does that mean?" "It means that sometimes you have to stop waiting for things to go wrong and just let yourself believe they won't." She smiled gently. Even if it's scary, Malik frowned. He wasn't sure if he could do that, but the words stuck with him anyway. That night, he made a decision. He waited until Lena had gone home, until the clinic was dark and quiet. Then, he gathered his few belongings, his tattered blanket, the small bag of food Lena had given him earlier, and picked up Koda. The puppy wagged his tail, thinking they were going for a walk. But Malik's stomach twisted. This wasn't a walk. This was goodbye. He carried Koda to the marketplace, to a quiet alley near the food stalls where he knew people often left scraps. Carefully, he set Koda down. The puppy blinked up at him, tail still wagging. Malik's chest ached. "You'll be better off here," he murmured. "People will feed you. You'll find someone who can take care of you. Someone who won't leave." Koda's ears perked up. He stepped forward, nudging Malik's hand with his nose. Malik swallowed hard. "Go on," he whispered. "You don't need me." Koda didn't move. Malik tried again. "Go, Koda." The puppy sat down, stared at him, didn't leave. Malik felt his throat tighten. "Please," he choked. "You have to go." Koda let out a small whimper, then stepped forward, pressing his tiny body against Malik's leg. And in that moment, something inside Malik broke. He sank to his knees, wrapping his arms around Koda, burying his face in the puppy's fur as tears spilled down his cheeks. For years, he had convinced himself that he didn't need anyone, that he could survive on his own. But Koda had never let him believe that, not even for a second. And now, Malik realized he didn't want to be alone anymore. Maybe Lena was right. Maybe trust was a choice. And for once in his life, Malik chose to stay. Malik stayed in the alley for a long time, his arms wrapped tightly around Koda, his breath unsteady as he tried to quiet the emotions crashing inside him. He had spent years teaching himself not to feel, not to hope, not to believe in things that could be ripped away. But here was Koda choosing him. Even after Malik had tried to push him away, Even after giving him the chance to find something better, Coda had stayed. Maybe Lena was right. Maybe trust wasn't something that just happened. Maybe it was something you had to hold on to, even when it scared you. With a shaky breath, Malik finally stood, lifting Coda into his arms. He wiped at his eyes with the back of his sleeve, glancing up at the night sky. The stars flickered, distant but constant, like tiny reminders that no matter how dark things seemed, light still existed. And for the first time, Malik wanted to believe that maybe, just maybe, things could be different. The next morning, he walked into the clinic with Coda trotting beside him. Lena was already inside, setting up supplies for the day. She looked up when she heard the door open, a small knowing smile tugging at her lips. "Morning, Malik," she said, like always. Malik hesitated in the doorway. He had been coming here for weeks now, but today felt different. Because today, he wasn't just walking in to do a job. Today, he was choosing to stay. "Morning," he mumbled, stepping inside. Lena eyed him carefully, then her gaze drifted to Coda. "Rough night?" Malik shrugged. "Something like that." She nodded as if she understood. And maybe she did. She didn't ask for details, didn't press him to talk. Instead, she simply reached into a nearby cabinet, pulled out a small bowl, and filled it with fresh water. She set it down near the corner of the room, gesturing for Coda. "There," she said. "A spot for him too." Malik swallowed hard. A spot for him. Not just for the day. Not just for now. But for always. Coda patted over, lapping at the water, his tail wagging. Malik let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Maybe this was real. Maybe he wasn't just passing through. Maybe, just maybe, he belonged here. The weeks that followed were unlike anything Malik had ever known. The clinic became more than just a place to work. It became a place where he felt safe. A place where he knew there would always be food. Where Coda had a warm corner to sleep. Where no one looked at him like he was a problem to be chased away. He still slept outside most nights, but he didn't feel like he was hiding anymore. Lena never treated him like a charity case. She never spoke to him like he was broken or something to be fixed. She just let him be, and that, more than anything, made him trust her. Slowly, Malik let himself settle. He still worked hard, still kept his guard up around strangers, but some of the tension in his chest started to ease. One evening, as they closed the clinic, Lena handed him a small bundle. Malik frowned, looking down at the wrapped package. "What's this?" he asked. Lena smirked. "Open it." He hesitated before unwrapping the cloth. Inside was a pair of shoes. Sturdy, well-worn but solid. Malik blinked. "I figured it was time," Lena said casually, as if it weren't a big deal. "Thought they might make walking a little easier." Malik stared at the shoes, something tightening in his throat. He had been barefoot for so long, he had forgotten what it felt like to have something of his own. For a second, he wanted to refuse, to say he didn't need them, but that would be a lie. So instead, he nodded, gripping them tightly. "Thank you," he murmured. Lena just smiled. "You're welcome, kid." Malik glanced down at Coda, who wagged his tail in approval. Maybe staying wasn't so scary after all. Malik wore the shoes the next morning. They felt strange at first, heavy, unfamiliar. The leather rubbed against his heels in a way his bare feet never had. But he didn't complain. He wouldn't, because Lena had given them to him, because they meant something. He spent the day working as usual, sweeping, organizing supplies, checking on Coda in his little corner of the clinic. But something felt different. A shift, subtle but real. For the first time, Malik wasn't just getting through the day. He was part of it. He was here. Lena noticed too. "Looking good, kid," she remarked with a grin as she nodded toward his feet. Malik felt heat rise to his face. He shrugged. "They fit," she smirked. "That's the point of shoes." He rolled his eyes but couldn't stop the smallest smile from creeping onto his lips. The weeks continued like this, with Malik and Coda falling into something steady. Every morning, they walked to the clinic together. Every evening, Lena gave them something to eat before they headed back to their spot near the bridge. And every night, as Malik lay with Coda curled beside him, He stopped waiting for it to disappear. But the world had a way of reminding him that not everything lasted. It started with footsteps. Malik had just finished locking up the clinic one evening when he heard them. A slow, deliberate sound approaching from behind. His instincts flared, and he turned, heart hammering. A man stood a few feet away, tall, eyes sharp, familiar. The shopkeeper from the market. Malik stiffened. "Didn't think I'd see you around here again," the man mused, crossing his arms. His voice was casual, but there was something cold underneath. Malik swallowed hard. "I work here now," the man scoffed. "Yeah, I heard. Funny, isn't it? A street rat playing house in a clinic." Malik clenched his fists. Koda growled softly at his feet, ears flattened. The shopkeeper's expression darkened. "People like you don't get new beginnings," he said, voice low. "You don't change. Sooner or later, she'll see that." A sick feeling curled in Malik's stomach. He had fought against those same words inside his own head for years, and now someone else was saying them out loud. "Stay out of my way, boy," the man warned, "or I'll make sure you regret it." Then, just as quickly as he had appeared, he turned and walked away. Malik stood frozen, his breath coming in uneven bursts. Koda pressed against his leg, his small body solid, grounding. Malik exhaled shakily, reaching down to scratch behind Koda's ears. "We're okay," he murmured, though the words felt hollow. Because deep inside, a familiar voice whispered, "What if he's right?" The man's words clung to Malik's thoughts like a shadow. People like you don't change. He had spent years believing that himself, hadn't he? That no matter how hard he tried, no matter what he did, he would always be the street kid. The one people ignored. The one people chased away. But Koda had chosen him. Lena had given him a chance. And he had stayed. So maybe, just maybe, he had already changed. The thought carried him through the next few days, though the unease never fully left him. He watched over Koda a little more closely. He listened for footsteps in the alleyways. He caught himself glancing over his shoulder whenever he locked up the clinic at night. But nothing happened, and slowly the fear faded. Because Lena still greeted him every morning with a smile. Because Koda still wagged his tail when he woke up. Because Malik was still here. One evening, as they were closing up, Lena leaned against the counter and studied Malik for a long moment. "You know," she said, "you don't have to sleep outside." Malik tensed. "I'm fine. I know you are," Lena said. "But you could be better." He didn't answer. She sighed, crossing her arms. "I don't know what you're waiting for, Malik." He hesitated, staring down at his hands. He wasn't sure either. Maybe he was afraid that if he fully accepted this life, this place, this home, it would all disappear. Maybe he still didn't believe he deserved it. Lena must have sensed his hesitation because she softened. "You don't have to decide today," she said. "Just know that the door's open." Malik swallowed hard. A door. Open. For him. The thought stayed with him that night as he lay with Koda under the stars, staring up at the endless sky. And for the first time, he wondered what it would feel like to walk through that door. The choice came sooner than he expected. Started with rain. Not just a drizzle, but a downpour, thick, heavy drops that soaked through Malik's blanket in minutes. He huddled against the wall, Koda pressed against him, both of them shivering. The wind howled. Thunder rumbled in the distance. It wasn't the first time Malik had been caught in a storm, but it was the first time he realized that he didn't have to be. He had a place to go. He had a key in his pocket. A choice. Malik let out a shaky breath, looking down at Koda. The puppy blinked up at him, ears drooping from the cold. It wasn't even a question anymore. Malik stood, lifting Koda into his arms. And for the first time in his life, he walked toward shelter instead of away from it. The clinic was dark when he arrived, rain dripping from his clothes as he fumbled with the key. He hesitated, his pulse quickening. Then he took a deep breath and stepped inside. Warmth enveloped him immediately. The air smelled of herbs and something faintly sweet, like the tea Lena always made in the evenings. Koda shook off the rain and trotted forward, sniffing the air. Malik stood frozen. Then, slowly, he let the door close behind him. Lena found them the next morning, curled up on a cot in the back room, Coda snoring softly beside him. She didn't say anything at first, just smiled, like she had known all along that he would come home. And maybe, just maybe, so had he.